As promised the last week, in this video I want to talk about some of the hardest RPGs I have finished in these past years. But I'll avoid some of the ones I have shared multiple times and those that have endless farm cycles like Eve and things like that. And I want to begin from the easiest to the most challenging one, at least in my perception. So let's begin. I want to start with Lost Epic. This is a side-scroller with RPG elements, not to be confused with Metroidvanias. In a sense, think about this entry as a 2D Soulsborne game. Here you have the chance to choose between three main weapons: bows, short swords, and long swords. There are gauntlets too, but they work like magic ones. The catch here is that, as you unlock these weapons, you will unlock different skills that once you level them up, you can use them with whatever weapon of the same kind. Similarly as the Soul series, you can level up your equipment, so they increase defense or damage. An interesting thing here is that as you level up, you will be able to allocate those points in different attributes. However, I will say, do not stress about the system, because you can reselect these attributes as you advance in the game. Aside from those mechanics, there isn't much else, but to square up against bosses, because they are the main dish in this whole mess, and hang on tight, because as you advance, you will have to face stronger versions of them, ultimately turning some fights into a nightmare. Now I place it as an easy from hard games because you can abuse healing items, ultimately turning some of these fights into a walk in the park, unless the boss gets you into one of those combos that deals plenty of damage. While it is a so-so game, I recommend it for a short adventure. In the 9th place, I want to talk about Class of Heroes. This is a DRPG where you can create your character since the beginning, giving you the chance to choose some classes. However, there are some things to consider, as the synergy between races, gender, and alignment. On this front, if you wanna play this game and more or less advance without having to face that many problems, I recommend to check a guide, because some classes require really specific things. The main challenge in this game comes due to its quest nature, as there are some mandatory quests to advance in the story. Some of them ask you to acquire items with really low chances to be dropped, turning part of the experience a bit boring at the beginning. Later you will notice that not having the map of a particular area can turn the whole experience into a nightmare, despite having the chance to use some magics or items to see the maps. On this front, I cannot stress this enough. Have enough multiple ways to visualize the map and leave the dungeons, because the worst thing that can happen to you is running out of these items and magics, leaving the whole group in dangerous places. If it comes to that point, your memory is the one which is going to save everyone, unless you enter the place with multiple traps and floors to dispel magics. So yep, there are multiple reasons why this game can be nerve-wracking. Ironically, bosses are perfectly manageable, until you reach the very last stretch of the main game and of course the post-content. In the 8th place, I wanna share Metaphor. Okay, this is a kinda hard game in some areas, primarily because you have a schedule and number of days to do some activities. So sure, you can mess around, but ultimately, if you wanna do everything, sometimes you will have to face terrible environments, places with really strong enemies, and a general lack of items to recover MP, unless you turn your main character into a mage. Yes, the cool thing is that there are multiple workarounds, but having time to do some activities kinda pushes you to be quite efficient in dungeons. On top of this, add the classic press turn system, where by hitting weaknesses, you get extra turns. However, this also works the other way around, so it is important to have a nice balance between physical attacks and magics, plus some moves to add weaknesses to your enemies, as sometimes bosses lack weaknesses, having to rely on evasions, crits, blocks, repels, and stuff like that. What's cool about Metaphor is that Atlus added plenty of enemies that have to be beaten in specific ways, or bosses with puzzles, if that makes sense, meaning that some encounters go sour real fast. Once you get what is going on. This particular feeling appears somewhere around the mid and last parts of the game, and to make things much more complicated, the very last boss is a bit of a douche, plus the extra one, where if you don't know what you're doing, one turn is all you need to see game over. In the 7th place I will throw Is the Odin Felgana. Now, this game has multiple layers that turn the whole experience into a nice challenge, starting with the lack of maps. At first, it isn't that big of a deal, but as you advance, there are areas that can be tricky to traverse, primarily because some places have hidden paths or things like that, so you end up going in circles for a while. However, the best challenges come with bosses, as they tend to be nerve-wracking, because they radically change their behavior as you reduce their HP, turning some battles into pure nightmare. On top of this, the last time I played this game, I tried hard difficulty, and yep, this pushes you to find more items, change and upgrade your equipment, and of course increase some extra levels, otherwise you deal little to no damage. No kidding with that, if you do not have the right damage output, you will see really low numbers, practically turning the whole fight into something impossible. Despite those details, I believe it was worth playing it in a harder difficulty, as the game pushes you to also be quite tactical with your attacks, learn the enemy moves and exploit as many openings as possible. Needless to say that this is easier said than done, cause I saw game overs all over the place. For the 6th entry, I wanna talk about Operation Abyss. Now, this is another JRPG which is hard to recommend, unless you really wanna give it a try. Yeah, be my guest. As other DRPGs, you have the chance to create your team and jump into the fray. There are multiple reasons why playing this game is simply a harsh experience. One of them comes with the labyrinths. Oftentimes you have to explore convoluted areas, but you're on your own. And believe me, oftentimes you will miss an event. Therefore, the following event will not appear, and this turns into something like a chain reaction, because you will move in circles all over the place, getting frustrated as the random encounters slowly increase the danger level, increasing the chances for variants to spawn, or in other words, meet bosses that sometimes pull stupidly broken moves that beat the heck out of your party. On top of this, let's say that you fought multiple variants while reaching the actual boss from that particular area. Well, they are just too gimmicky, to the point where oftentimes you will see party members fall like flies, almost right away. Yep, you end up these fights with one party member barely holding things up. If you're lucky enough and took some time to farm kinda late for extremely rare drops and somehow you are able to make them, you can slightly change things on your side. Otherwise, you need decent units to cheese some battles. In the 5th place, I will say Monster Menu. This roguelike JRPG is on another level, as it feels like a slap in the face, similarly as the previous game in this list. You create your character and dive into multiple dungeons. The thing here is that everything is a constant struggle. At least, the first 10 hours in my case, I was having a terrible time getting past the 20th floor, because you need to repair multiple items to have decent chances to stay alive. As you proceed each floor, you need to gather some food, equipment, and other things to more or less have a chance. Otherwise, as these bars start to deplete, your stats start to go down. So you may be, let's say, level 20, but real stats of level 10. This pushes you to beat enemies as fast as possible, while keeping your party members happy, because every 10th floor, bosses will appear, and yikes, they are simply overwhelming. That is where you end up patching levels with good equipment, and sometimes RNGesus is the one that F you up really good, because you can have multiple bad floors where initiating a combat is practically asking for an insta game over, due to the number of enemies you need to manage. Unfortunately, it is another game kinda hard to recommend. Despite that, it deserves to be here, as it is simply unforgiving. Getting closer to the first places, we can find Wizardry, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord. Yet another RPG where you can create your characters. And the grandpa of RPGs is simply unforgiving. Now, this is a relatively small game, but the RNG is on another level. Now, this particular version has different quality of life ideas, like having the chance to see a minimap or being able to cast a spell to find your way in the map. Yes, in the original game you had to use paper and pen to make your own maps, count the steps and be careful with those little details, otherwise getting slightly lost in this game means that your whole team might perish. And yep, here it isn't like your team dies and you can revive them. If they perish, you're sent back and you need to create other characters, rinse and repeat. Now, the main difficulty about this game comes with random encounters, as this dungeon is doing everything it can to beat the S out of you at every moment. Sometimes you will get into this place, and the first encounter you have leaves 3 party members paralyzed. You retreat, come back, and then face an enemy that one-hit KO a character. Retreat, come back, to then find another obnoxious enemy that drains 2 levels. So whenever you go back to the town, you need to pay handsomely to recover those levels. And like that, each step feels like a slap in the face. Needless to say what happens if you aren't prepared for the last challenge. Most likely your whole team will be lost in 1 or 2 turns. In the third entry, I would like to place Xenoblade Chronicles. Yes, I don't like to leave things to pure RNG and obnoxious ideas, so that is why I decided to allocate this game higher. And needless to say how the Wii experience was for this game. However, I also thought about Chronicles sets, as there are multiple areas where things can go downhill really fast. Well, you understand the different systems it has, but I prefer to leave the first game of the saga here. Now, there were multiple challenges. For example, stats. Late in the game, they start to feel like a kick in the nuts, because if you do not have morale up and the right agility, you will miss attacks left and right. And there is no way to fix this unless you take your time farming or gathering items and specializing your team for those particular battles. Prior to that, the main bosses are the ones that can beat the heck out of you if for some reason you misread a move. There were multiple moments in this game where I felt slight difficulty spikes, but the Thelephia are the ones I simply despise, as oftentimes they had some annoying moves. So in general, I felt that Xenoblade Chronicles was a constant struggle in multiple places, and triggering battles against broken enemies was quite easy, so going left and right was quite common. In the second place, I start thinking about Etra and Odyssey, but to be completely honest, the HD remasters aren't as complicated as the originals for the DS, so instead I would like to throw the fifth entry here, Beyond the Myth. When I talk about Etra and Odyssey games, I always mean with all and post content. Once again, another DRPG where you create your team and cross fingers, cause every encounter can turn into really bad situations. Now, the main story of this game is filled with multiple challenges. I will say that similarly as other games in this list. This entry is a constant struggle since the beginning to the end. Gimmick encounters, bosses, labyrinths and super bosses in the mid of casual places, so they can destroy your team in case you decided to fight them. But to be fair, once you know what is going on and you get to understand some broken tactics, you can cheese bosses left and right. Unfortunately, I didn't know them until way later. The part that still grinds my gears is the post content, because maps were so unforgiving. Each floor was a mess that, in all honesty, I don't want to remember, because this is one of those places that forces you to pay close attention to what you're doing. Otherwise you can wander hours upon hours. And let's not talk about enemies up there, and their freaking vines. More often than not they block your character moves, and if that was annoying, there is no need for me to explain what happened once you found the Lovecraft creature. Yep, game overs all over the place. And in the first place, I will say, Record of Agares War. This SRPG is still the hardest game I have played in these past years, because every fight feels like everything can go downhill real fast, as enemies exploit every little mistake, turning the whole journey into a real nightmare. As many kinda old school JRPGs, this game explains pretty much nothing to you, so what ends up happening is that most likely you advance without shame or glory, but without completing some little trials, which come back to bite in the third generation, as the difficulty turns simply impossible to manage, unless you took your time to farm and craft some weapons or equipment. And like that, there are multiple things that can turn into annoying circumstances. My biggest issue, late in the game, was that my team composition wasn't exactly the best, which unfortunately turned the post content into a mess, as these bosses can avoid almost every combo, so you have to destroy them by stacking the best moves. However, farming up there is a whole experience, because you won't fight the same challenge. Sometimes they can add an extra boss just to mess with you. And needless to say, what happens once you reach the gods? You will have to go back, capture really specific enemies, so later you can create really powerful items to more or less have a chance. If the main game was tedious, the very last section is just mental. Now for those wondering, I'll update this list, I don't know, in like 2 years. But now let me know which RPGs have grinded your gears so good in these past years. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.